Your grandmother was 102, but I'll do my best. Thank you. I come from Annie's side of the family. Annie was born on a hot, stormy afternoon on August 18, 1915. The way she told it, her mother said there was a boom of thunder, a flash of lightning, and Annie appeared. Judging by your reaction, you understand how fitting that is, a description for the arrival of such a person. Annie was the second of 9 children born to her parents, B.M. and Hazel Williams, or as our large family alternately refers to them, Ma and Big Daddy, or Puddin' and Daddo. She was born in Norfolk, then grew up in Norfolk County, before its name changed to Chesapeake. She had 4 brothers and was the oldest of 5 sisters. So Annie has had a lifelong experience at being a leader and a teacher, and it's fair to say she was the matriarch of our family for the past 30 years or more. Annie emulated Daddo and inherited his strict moral code. I don't know a time where she didn't adhere staunchly to her professed values. She was the most principled person I had ever met. One time we were attending an anniversary celebration of a school named after Daddo, and I heard someone say when we walked in, "Oh, there are the Williamses, you can tell. They have a look." And I said this to Annie and said, "What did they mean by that?" And Annie was unperturbed. Annie said, "He's right. We do." Annie was very proud of the teaching that Daddo always shared with her and her siblings. You were brought into the world with a good name, and it's up to you to keep it that way. Annie also loved Puddin' and took after her in two very important ways: her dedication to her church and the cultivation over her lifetime of meaningful relationships. She had many devoted friends, but she was also interested in the stranger. I can recall when Annie introduced herself to new neighbors, encouraged friends of friends to attend First Baptist, and inclined herself to making connections between 2 people that were friends, but they just didn't know it yet. Annie liked inviting others into the life that she found meaningful: family, church, and education. Annie loved the Commonwealth of Virginia, and she was aptly named Annie Virginia. One time she was introduced to some visitors at her home by saying, "Now Annie, can you say your name to the guests?" And Annie was 5 years old, so she decided to spell. "My name is Annie Virginia, ANNIEVIRGINIA." And she went on with the other letters, "I'm an FFV and a blue blood." As her parents disappeared behind their hands, she would always laugh at how she must have embarrassed them, but she was only expressing the pride that they taught her to have. After I returned from California after living there for a couple of years, Annie seemed very relieved, and she would tell me so, but she would also say with incredulity, "I mean, why would anyone leave God's country in the first place?" Annie attended Harrisonburg State Teachers College when she was 16 years old, which became Madison College, which became JMU. Her class was the first to graduate that school with a 4-year diploma, a fact that she was just recalling proudly several days before she passed away. Annie earned her college degree in education and home economics. As a teacher in the times in which she was educated, Annie was expected to conduct herself as an example at all times, not just in the classroom. This was like second nature to Annie, as I mentioned, her principled nature and how she lived her life. She was not one to bend to moral rationalization, and book titles such as "I'm okay, you're okay" made her furious. I once asked her why, and she replied, "Everything isn't okay. Some things are, and some things are not." One of her college professors best summarized her as a Victorian lady. According to Annie, his exact words are, "Miss Williams, you are the most Victorian lady at this college." He may have meant it as a challenge, but Annie's heartfelt response was, "Thank you very much." Annie met my grandfather, Garnet Poindexter, at a 4-H summer camp at Virginia Tech, and they were married in 1940. They were married for 47 and a half years at the time of Gar's passing in 1988. She lived 30 more years on her own. Annie and Gar had their first of their 3 daughters, my Aunt Martha, just 7 months before Pearl Harbor, and their second daughter, my mother, Ann Ross, less than a year after World War II began. Their third daughter, my Aunt Jenny, was born after the war ended, so she was their only baby boomer. Once the family settled in Richmond, Annie and Gar joined First Baptist Church and became lifelong active members. I think everyone who knew Annie knew how important First Baptist was to her, especially the relationships that she forged here over the years. She was very active in her second home. She participated in many ways over the years, including in the Women's Missionary Union, her circle, community missions, Flow, for ladies only, Esther class. She taught students with disabilities, and she served on various other committees. Annie taught 2nd and 3rd grades at William Fox School in Richmond for decades. She loved to reminisce about teaching children in the classroom. Maybe it was from all her practice with so many siblings growing up, but Annie was pure magic with children. I experienced this as one of her own grandchildren, but I actually realized this through observation as an adult. As soon as she'd meet a child, she'd have them eating out of the palm of her hand. She was the Jedi master of children. To address an unwanted behavior, she'd say, "Of course we don't do that," and give a certain look. The child, mesmerized, would say, "Of course not." And that was that. I didn't inherit that, unfortunately. When my children would visit her, she'd spontaneously announce, "Time to ring the bells," and the children would run to the bell collection Annie kept on her bookshelf and hand out bells to everyone present, and at Annie's count, of course, they'd begin to ring away. I remember as a little child, my brother and I were tussling over a toy that we each wanted, and Annie was talking on the phone. She did not let that disturb her conversation. In fact, I doubt the person on the other line even knew that she had children in the house. Annie just nonchalantly removed a shoe and tossed it at us. And she knew that we would be so stunned that we would drop the toy and just walk off and move along. That's it. Therefore, I have no doubt that in the classroom, Annie had complete command of the room and was able to masterfully teach in that environment. My Aunt Jenny actually had the privilege of being one of Annie's students over the years in one of her grades. And she shares that Annie was very strict and exacting, but also a dedicated, caring, and kind teacher. One time, my Aunt Jenny learned a poem the night before Annie was to teach it in class, and so Annie excused Jenny to the hallway to wait while the rest of the class learned the poem, because Jenny was saying it a step ahead of everyone. That was the only time my Aunt Jenny's ever been in any trouble in her entire life. Annie relished the opportunity to show her class how fair she was and what she would be able to do to any one of them if she was able to do it to her own daughter. There are many other examples in the classroom, but there's a student that I just wanted to bring up that Annie took care to be concerned about as an immigrant to this country. There was a Chinese student in her class whose parents allowed Annie, at her invitation, to bring him to Sunday school and church. And so Annie and Gar would go and pick him up from the home that was near the laundry that his parents opened in the fan. And Annie continued to keep up with this gentleman throughout his life, and they've maintained a friendship all these years. She's very proud of the man that he became, a talented, intelligent pharmacist, and to this day, I believe they exchange Christmas cards. Annie was thrilled to have the intelligent and capable students, but she also expressed compassion and affection for those who needed extra help. She was a teacher for special needs Sunday school classes at First Baptist and formed meaningful friendships with some of those students as well. While Annie was still teaching, the Richmond Public Schools were racially integrated. Annie would reminisce about those days when the children and teachers feared one another and had various other cultural misunderstandings, and how she applied the same teaching standards and care that she always had to make a difference during those turbulent years. She would express pride in teaching with her door open, so anyone could see that Mrs. Poindexter's class was going to excel together with mutual respect shared. When you live to be 102 years old, you've seen a lot of changes in the world. Way too many to delineate here. One of Annie's earliest memories was of her grandmother, the original Annie, hitching up the pony cart to pick her brother and her up from elementary school. That's how long ago she was little. She marveled at all the changes that occurred over the 100 years in her memory. But as she would say, not all progress is good. With a twinkle in her eye, she would remind us of the agelessness of morality and good values. Annie never had central air conditioning or a dishwasher until she was 90 years old. She didn't need it, she said. She accepted a window AC unit when Garnet fell ill in the 1980s, but she mainly just used a big box fan, and she would open the screen porch door and open the windows when it was hot outside. Keep the lights off, she'd say, you'll be fine. She accepted a microwave about that time as well, but she mainly stuck to her toaster oven, her big oven, and her stove. Annie loved to write hand notes and had lovely penmanship. She wrote prolifically to family and friends all throughout her lives, and those notes contained both her firmly held opinions as well as her kind thoughts and words of encouragement. Annie never owned a computer or sent an email. She never talked, well, she talked on a cell phone, but she never owned one. And when she talked on it, she'd say, "Is this right? What am I supposed to do with this?" She learned to love her answering machine, so she could hear from all of her loved ones if she missed their call. But she detested call waiting. If she was ever asked to wait, she would simply hang up. Annie always ended a phone call with, "You tell those children Annie said," and then another 10-minute conversation could easily start up again. She would rightly protest if she ever felt that her caller or visitor was squeezing her in between other obligations. She promoted and stood for a lifestyle that prioritized people over perpetual busyness. She also always wanted to leave the conversation with a moral to the story or something for you to ponder, just as she has done today with the scripture readings. She loved her family, but as that Victorian lady was not given to profuse public expressions of affection, she would say "Mizpah" instead of "I love you," extending a blessing that her Sunday school friends adopted when parting ways. From the book of Genesis, Mizpah meant, "May the Lord watch over me and thee while we are apart one from another." An intellectual's code for "I love you." Annie was the first to say, "I'm not a feminist," but she was pioneering as a lady throughout her lifetime. She was a proud college graduate, the first in her family, a working outside the home mother, a big fan of wearing pants, once they became fashionably acceptable to Southern women. And we always called her by her first name. She loved proper formality, but she was not 100% dogmatic about it when expressing herself. My husband Basil got to know Annie as a lovely, formal, proper lady who always welcomed him warmly and impressed him with her penchant for C-SPAN, even into her 100s. He learned to ask if it were a hug day, and every now and then she would oblige him one. Annie was a lifelong intellectual. She loved books and was inspired by them. She always had several going each and every week until her eyes failed her at age 1.